Hi, and welcome back to Intro to Biology for Majors, or BIOL 1224. This is your chapters 45 and 46 PowerPoint. They go hand in hand, so we do those together. This is actually from Module 5 of this course, and it's Biology 2E, Openstax book, chapters 45 and 46, Ecology and Ecosystems. Okay, so first let's talk about our objectives, and there are 3 of them. So I want you to be able to recognize the dynamic nature of populations and behaviors, identify the role of macromolecules in protocell formation and the theory of endosymbiosis, and 3 is recognize the role of decomposers in an ecosystem. Okay, so first let's start off by talking about how populations are dynamic. So once again, populations consist of all species living within a specific area or habitat. Populations do fluctuate, so the numbers fluctuate based on a number of factors. Seasonal and yearly changes in the environment, which could be those abiotic factors we discussed previously in the previous slideshow. Natural disasters like forest fires and volcanoes, and competition for resources between and within species, which we've also talked about a lot, both in lecture and lab. Ecologists measure size, density, dispersion pattern, or basically where they're located, age, structure, and sex ratios of populations. Statistics and mathematical models of this are a vital part of the work that ecologists do. So while we're speaking about populations, I'd like to talk about the human population. So the world's population is actually growing exponentially and has been growing exponentially for the last few hundred years. So this title of the graph that I have up here on the right is Human Population Growth Over Time. So this graph will kind of show you a visual of what I'm talking about. On the left side, we have human population in millions, and down here we have the year. So this year here would represent the year 2000. So if you look here, we're currently, when I'm recording this, in the year 2022, and we have human population growth back in the year 2000, jumping from about the 1500s to 2000, so that's about a 500-year period. We have from literally down here in the very, very low millions to up here closer to what we have now, which would be about 6 billion people. So the human population has exponentially grown just in the last 500 years based on a graph similar to this. So carrying capacity, which means the amount of people that the planet is able to hold, or amount of organisms of a certain species that the Earth can sustain. That carrying capacity has increased due to migration, agriculture, medical advances, and communication. So migration meaning the migratory patterns of people, agriculture, how we grow our food, medical advances, so modern medication and medicine, and communication with one another has allowed us to increase our carrying capacity on the planet. But unchecked human population growth could actually have dire long-term consequences. Communities include all the different species within a given area. This variety is called species richness. So I just have an image here kind of showing a very large crowd along with this graph that should kind of show you a visual representation of what we're talking about here. So now let's talk about behaviors. So responses to stimuli would kind of be what we're talking about here. So how an organism responds to the environment and the stimulus taking place outside of it. Instinctual behaviors include mating and communication methods. Learned behaviors, so something that the organism learns without instinct, it learns throughout its lifetime, includes imprinting, habituation, conditioning, and most powerfully cognitive learning, so being able to learn. Connections between behavior and genetics is well established, but it's still controversial to consider it entirely genetic. So now let's talk a little bit about a controversial topic, but a topic nonetheless that we need to cover, which would be life's origins. Life's origins, as we know, still remain mysterious. Scientists know little about life's origin. Clay and iron pyrite may have catalyzed, basically started the first reactions because they are positively charged and could bind negative charged nucleotides. Once a molecule like RNA formed and replicated, natural selection took over, and then we started the processes that we've spoken about this entire semester, from RNA all the way through natural selection. Stable molecules could then self-replicate and take over. So lipid membranes might have enclosed some self-replicating system because they form spontaneously. This is just one sort of explanation of life's origin. So when speaking about life's origin, protocells are actually really important to talk about, and this image on the right side of the screen is a protocell. So lipid-enclosed self-replicating systems have the potential to form protocells. These would eventually give rise to what we know as prokaryotes. The biological macromolecules are the building blocks of life, which we've talked about before, CHOMPs. Prokaryotes are a single-celled organism that lack a nucleus and a membrane-bound organelles, which we knew from previous slideshows in the beginning of this course. Most prokaryotes have similar parts. Bacteria contain plasmids, which are circles of DNA apart from the chromosome, and ribosomes use mRNA to synthesize proteins. So in this slide, I just have an image of what we would consider a protocell on the left, which may have been those very, very first cell-type organisms that existed. And then on the right, I have a traditional prokaryote, like we've spoken about in class. So now I would like to talk about domains. So bacteria are very diverse. Some have what we call endospores, and they survive very harsh conditions. Cyanobacteria are autotrophs and the first to release oxygen gas as byproduct of photosynthesis. Archaea, we've learned about, often called extremophiles since they were first discovered in extreme habitats. So we've mainly spoken in this course about bacteria and eukaryotes. We sort of left archaea behind. And I did speak in the very beginning about how archaea and bacteria used to be one domain together, and it was actually split when archaea were discovered in such extreme habitats. So eukaryotes include yeast, fungi, plants, and animals. So now to give you sort of a breakdown of those domains we talked about. So domain bacteria, domain archaea, domain eukarya. And as we've spoken about in previous labs, we have a potential common ancestor here. So here on this side, we have several different species of bacteria. We also have things like chloroplast, which we know about, cyanobacteria, which we've learned about. In archaea, we have like halophiles. They're very extreme environment living organisms. And then in eukarya, we have everything from slime molds and diatoms to animals, plants, flagellates, all kinds of different things here that we've talked about. So now for a few images. So here I have on the left, that green box would be bacteria. The example that I gave is Anabina because this is something we actually have looked at in lab. So it would be found in a pond environment, Anabina. Here we have archaea. So we have extremophiles found in extreme environments, and we didn't look at these in class together, but we did see bacteria cells and eukarya cells. So eukarya, I have here fungus, plants, and animals. So now let's talk a little bit about energy transfer, and I actually think that this image here, this energy pyramid on the right, is probably something that you've seen before in previous either biology or science, life science classes. So talking about energy transfer, ecosystems would shut down without prokaryotes, without those very simple cells. Organisms acquire energy in a variety of ways. Sometimes organism is transferred between trophic levels, which would be these levels we're talking about here. So the bottom of the pyramid, the two middle sections and the top, those are considered different trophic levels. So energy is transferred between those trophic levels as the energy flows from the bottom to the top of the food web, with energy being lost at each transfer. Bacteria contributes to biomass and can be helpful or harmful if ingested or inhaled by us or other organisms. So as we're saying that energy flows from the bottom to the top, it's really interesting to think about. So down here we have producers. We've talked about those. They produce a lot of energy that then these consumers take in and consume that energy and use it themselves. So primary consumers would be considered the consumers that eat those initial producers. Usually they're herbivores like plant eaters like rabbits. And then we have secondary consumers like snakes and tertiary consumers. So what's interesting to think about is that these guys, they don't have to put off a lot of energy to grow. But these primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary, they always have to use a lot of energy to find the producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers that they eat. So at every different trophic level, 10% of the energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next. So these guys, which maybe are 100% energy, let's say, they're going to transfer only 10% of that energy to these rabbits after the rabbits get them, which means that by the time we get up here, we have less than half of the original energy we got from this first producer and primary consumer relationship. So 10% of the energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next, which is why these plants don't have to work very hard to grow, but these guys have to work really hard to find the food to sustain themselves. So tertiary consumers have to work a lot harder for that energy than producers do. So let's talk about microbes. Microbes are living things that humans have exploited for centuries to make things like beer and bread. They make food, medications, and drugs. Wastewater treatment plants actually use them to break down organic matter. So our wastewater treatment plant in Tulsa, I believe, is a tertiary plant, meaning they have 3 different sections of filtration. So this is an example here on the left of how that works. You have sewage that goes into filtration and primary settling. There's an aeration tank where it's sort of on top of the building usually. They aerate or allow oxygen to enter this tank. Primary digestion of sewage by aerobic microbes, which is what we're talking about, and activated sludge. So basically, we're talking about the microbes. So microbes exist within this aerated area within the wastewater treatment plant, as well as the secondary digestion of sewage and aerobic and anaerobic microbes. So we have it in this section and this section of our wastewater treatment plant. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the origin of eukaryotes. So those are the animal cells that we've talked a lot about this semester. So endosymbiosis theory proposes that mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, and chloroplast, where chlorophyll is stored in plants, originated as free-living bacteria engulfed by other microbes, which we talked about in the previous slide. Many organelles, such as the nucleus, might have resulted from membrane enfolding, so membranes folding in on one another. Mitochondria could have originated as what we think of now as aerobic bacteria. Chloroplasts could have originated as photosynthetic bacteria. So a eukaryotic cell has a nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles like the mitochondria and chloroplasts that we've talked about previously. So finally, let's talk about fungi. So fungi are essential decomposers, heterotrophic eukaryotes that feed by external digestion, so they do eat things from outside. A mushroom is only the fruiting body of a fungus, so it's like the fruit of that fungus. Fungi decompose dead plants and animals, which are extremely important. They're also important sources of food and medicine for other organisms as well as us, and they are vital to our ecosystems, but they can be poisonous and deadly, causing disease in plants and animals. Okay, so now let's talk key takeaways. So we have 3. The first one here would be populations are dynamic, and so are behaviors, which means they're always changing and moving. Spontaneous lipid formation and negative charge of nucleotides could explain developing protocells, or those cells we talked about maybe being the first in the entire world, that give rise to what we know now as prokaryotes. Endosymbiosis is the theory that photosynthetic bacteria, or bacteria using photosynthesis, were engulfed to form chloroplasts, and aerobic bacteria, air-loving, to form the mitochondria. So bacteria and fungi then are decomposers, and they are vital to our ecosystems. So this is the end of this PowerPoint. Send me an email if you have any questions, and if not, feel free to move on. Thank you.